Hi, folks. Welcome to another episode of Trine Time. Today, we're going to be discussing spiritual evolution, destiny, personal growth, and anything else that falls under that general heading and how it relates to astrology. So, this is going to be a fun video and an exciting topic. So, please stick around and please subscribe to our YouTube page, like us on Facebook, all that good stuff. All right, cool. So, James, do you want to kick it off?
Sure. I guess the pressure is on. Let's see. In starting with discussing anything like that, Alex, do you think this is funny? Because I'm stumbling over my words.
No, that's not funny. It's funny. Like, okay, James, you're it.
Oh, yeah, right. Who wants to go first? Yeah, who wants to go first? Well, I can always figure out something to talk about. I worked in restaurants for 10 years, so I can think on my feet.
Yeah.
Let's see. So. Well, I mean, in any discussion about like fate or destiny, I think that, or our spiritual, place in this life, or whatever it is that you want to discuss, I think it's important to start with just a few things, such as like the ascendant, and I think a lot of people don't necessarily consider that part of this idea of like where you are spiritually, but I do, in that it's kind of like showing like your role that you're playing in this life, in my opinion, from my perspective. And so like kind of like, they say a costume, and I kind of really relate to that idea, is that the sun being your spiritual self or your higher self, and the rising sign being like the costume you're wearing in this life. So the major points I would go to first thinking about that idea are the rising sign, and the part of fortune, probably the part of spirit. So the Arabic parts, the rising sign, the sun sign, and the house of the sun, and it's like everything, really, isn't it? Like it's starting to be everything. But so I mean that's a really good point. We were talking about that though, in which you can look at each of these placements and get a good idea about like what someone's like spiritual or life lessons are. But I would go with the sun placement and sign in the house too, and the north node and south node placements, and the rising sign as being some of the first things I would want to look at in considering this. So I took the long way around, but there you go.
So those
Okay.
four things, basically, the two
Um,
nodes, the ascendant, and the sun.
Yeah, if I just had to like start somewhere,
Yeah.
but then like I said, you can dig into this. So you can go into the prenatal eclipses. You can look at the Arabic parts. I mean, there's so many things you can look at.
Alex, what about you?
So I really have to agree with James about the ascendant being immensely important for anything, because that's your your moment of birth. Like before looking at anything else, and there's like people who prefer to go straight to Neptune when they're reading a natal chart, or Vesta or something. But the ascendant is really the point where I would start, regardless of anything else. Like if something screams at you from the other side of the chart, I'm over here, like there's sun with the north node and Neptune and everything is over. Just start from the ascendant. Like try to start from the ascendant regardless of whatever else is going on in the chart, and just progress from there to whatever it is you want to get to. Now, when it comes to personal development and spiritual development, we made a point earlier that what isn't spiritual, right? Everything is spiritual. Either that or nothing is spiritual, right?
Sure.
In the oneness of everything. So from that point of view, yes, we have to look at everything in the chart. Everything in the natal chart points to the native's karmic path, and that ties into like a higher orchestration of the universe. So that's spiritual at the end of it. But when people talk about spirituality and spiritual development, they usually refer to like, okay, does this person meditate? Does he have like experiences of the divine? Does he is he religious? Right? That's bhakti is a form of spirituality as well. So from this point of view, if you would look at any houses, I would go with the 5th and the 9th house. Sometimes there's a bit of confusion about which is what. The fifth house, I consider your real spirituality, your real spiritual practice,
Interesting.
what you really, the real spirit that you channel into the world. Whereas the ninth house is kind of the dharma with which you approach spirituality, the mentality that you have about spirituality, the guidance that you receive on your path. Now, if we were to take it to planets, again, as James said, I would take the sun, which is your true self, your pure essence. You would take your north node for personal development and karmic spiritual development of spiritual qualities, let's say. And last but absolutely not least in my book, in fact, it's one of the first, the soul planet, the planet among the 7 traditional planets, which ranks on the highest degree in your chart. I never miss looking at that one planet, and throughout the discussion maybe we can go more into that. Lars, what do you think about this subject? And if you would have at the end of it something to add about the soul planet, I would appreciate that.
Yeah, so sure. Yeah, well, just real quick about the soul planet, or what's called the Atmakaraka in Sanskrit. Again, taking the planet with the highest degrees in a given sign. And because I just mentioned that because one time somebody got really confused. They thought that I meant out of all 360 degrees, and no, it's just in a sign. So that planet, that planet is, according to Jaimini, supposed to hold in its hand the power over bondage and liberation. So it's an extremely, extremely important planet for discerning the nature of the person. And that's really how Jaimini uses it, transposing it to the Navamsha chart. That's, he tells you to look at all these yogas relative to that sign in the Navamsha chart and whatnot. And there's other ways to do it too, but it's really fascinating. That gives you a really more clear picture about like who and what that person really is. Now, I guess what I sort of like to focus on, it's hard to say because like James was saying, it's sort of like everything, like you were saying the same things, like everything, you have to look at everything. But, I sort of consider the nodes obviously to be really important here because they are probably the most fixed karmas in the chart. In Jyotish, you have the different karmas: fixed, unfixed, and unfixed. So some are more strongly ingrained, some are a little weaker. And I really feel like the nodes are the strongest by default. And so with the north node showing what you're, ravenous for in the world, and then the south node, actually Ketu, in Indian astrology, it shows, it's a significator of moksha, which is supreme liberation, nirvana, enlightenment, which comes as a shock to a lot of Westerners who tend to associate the South Node with like self-undoing and bad things. I will say the South Node is not necessarily great for anything of the world. The North Node will get you places and things in the world at a certain price, but the South Node will basically kind of create like a small, creates like a small black hole in the corner of your universe that you're supposed to get sucked through so that the ego or the sense of I can be dissolved into supreme, basically. And then I also like to look at Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And just very briefly, I follow Rudyard pretty strictly when interpreting those planets. They don't rule signs, and I really only look at their hard aspects usually. But the Transaturnians are very interesting because they constitute like a triple transformation of the person, whether by their natal placement or their transits. So Uranus is like basically, it works by like mostly on the mind is what I found. It like pokes holes in your mind and shows you, hey, things aren't linear. Things are non-dual and things are all occurring at once. Time is not linear, all that stuff. Neptune dissolves your barriers, and so it works more on the heart level, on the emotions, and it gives you a feeling of ecstasy, or sometimes extreme confusion as well. But its job is, metaphorically, is to give you this feeling of ecstasy and connection and to awaken the supreme bhakti within the heart. And then Pluto's job is to bring everything down to the most root level of things. So Pluto's very visceral and physical. And usually with Pluto transits, there's like this is how I was before, and this is how I am after. And there's a difference. And I've noticed that with Pluto transits, I've seen people get like surgeries or have diseases or things like that. With Uranus, it tends to destabilize things and push them in a direction to like see things in a new light. And with Neptune, yeah, unfortunately, people tend to go into a haze or a fog and throw themselves into some movement, like they're sacrificing themselves, martyring themselves, searching for redemption. But these three planets, they work together, at least, you know, what they represent works together to kind of get us out of the egotistical linear mindset. So I'll pass it along to somebody. I felt like I talked a little too long there, but
well, okay, so let's see, going back to like the nodes, because I mean the nodes are obviously important to me, like as you guys know, like with I have the Sun conjunct the North Node in Pisces, and I've spent a lot of time thinking about the nature of the nodes, and just the other day I was thinking about this idea, and I haven't necessarily read this, but it was just something I was contemplating on, is like the North Node being a place where we accumulate karma, and the South Node being a place where we are releasing karma. Sure. And like, I don't know if I've heard anyone say that specifically, or if it's written somewhere, but it just seems like it's somehow relevant. But I know that the North Node is definitely a very karmic place. And like, to clarify what that means with karma, karma is referring to this idea of energetic balance, and like how like in Star Wars, you know, bringing balance to the Force. I mean, I think about this all the time with like the nodes in astrology, and so with the nodes, you are being challenged to bring balance to the area of where the North Node is, I think. And it's like I think it's one of your greatest challenges, and really specifically the house placement, because large numbers of people have the sign placement because the nodes spend 18 months in the sign, about 18 months. So the house placement specifically will be very relevant to this idea of where you are, where you're learning your biggest lessons. And so I think that's a good way of looking at it from my perspective. So
yeah, beautifully said. Beautifully said. And I would just add before passing it off to Alex that actually, yeah, Rudyard basically says something very similar to that. What you're saying, the point of intake and the point of release. So
well, yeah,
it's really cool that you were tapping into that.
Well, right. And I think that idea is more like well known as this idea of, oh, you're drawing things in at the North Node and you're releasing them at the South Node. I think that I think the idea of like what you're drawing in and what you're releasing is more like what I'm trying to like grapple with in my mind.
Oh, cool.
And so what are you drawing in at the North Node placement is you're drawing in experiences. So that's where you are learning new experiences or more of this experience. So not necessarily new, but just more of it. So, and then the South Node being where, okay, I have lots of experience here. And so as I draw on these new experiences down here or these other experiences, and I release them up here and wherever the South Node is, right? It's kind of like you're drawing water from a well. And so as you learn these lessons and gain wisdom where the North Node is, you can see the manifestation in the spiritual gold where the South Node is.
Cool. Alex?
So, yeah, beautifully said. And the North Node is really very, very important, more than it's usually given credit for, I think. Now, with the North Node, we kind of have to figure out how active it is, whether the North Node is more active, the South Node is more active, whether the nodal axis is active to any large extent, because sometimes, you know, the nodal axis is in some place, like it will give some effect. You have Rahu in your 12th house, you kind of have strange dreams every now and then when it gets activated by a transit, but nothing more than that if it's not more prominently activated. So with the nodes, we kind of have to look to whether they get activated by visible traditional planets in some way, or if they're in angular houses aligning to the ascendant, things like that. There's like a whole toolbox of techniques for looking at that, obviously. But I would like to draw the parallel with the soul planet. The soul planet does not need anything else to be active. Whatever is your soul planet, again, the Atmakaraka, the planet with the highest degree in your chart, you will feel that, you will know it. And it happens so often that I have readings with people and they don't know about the concept of the soul planet because it's an Indian concept. If you're familiar with Western astrology, you may not be familiar with the concept of the soul planet. And as soon as I mention, well, this planet is your soul planet and it rules this and that house, it's placed here, and the houses may change because, most of the time they know their Placidus house system, and I'll use their whole sign house system. And as soon as I mention their soul planet, like everything pops into place for them. They just get that aha face moment where like it all makes sense now. I know who I am, right? Like that's a bit exaggerated, but
Sure.
they have this aha moment when I tell them, well, look, Mars is your soul planet. It's in your 10th house. It's not in your 9th house, and it rules your 6th house. And are you a surgeon, for example, or have you ever considered going into surgery, tattooing, using sharp objects, or something like that?
Or boxing or something. An athlete.
Yeah, those are things which will develop your spiritual qualities. Those are things which your essence is craving for in this lifetime. And that just makes a world of sense for anyone, regardless what aspects other planets make to it, what house it's in. Your soul planet will always, 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 I cannot stress this enough, be important for your spiritual path. And of course, as Lars mentions, there are a plethora of techniques in Vedic astrology, especially looking at the soul planet, not only in the birth chart and not only through various aspects besides the alignments, right? Trine, sextile, squares, using the Jaimini aspects, the Parashara aspects, then looking at the soul planet in the divisional charts for each particular area of life. And there you will see, for example, in the D9 chart, you will get a deeper insight into the spiritual nature of that planet for you. If you look at your D10 harmonic chart, you will see how your spiritual path translates into your public life, into your career, into your worldly karmas, and so forth. So yeah, I really placed a lot of importance on the soul planet. So I just wanted to emphasize that a bit.
Can you also clarify for everyone what you mean when you refer to D9 and D10?
Sure. So the D9 and the D10 and D whatever number is the divisional chart, otherwise known in Western astrology as harmonic charts. Basically, we take each sign and we chop them up. If it's the D9, we chop each sign up in 9 parts. If it's the D10, we chop it up into 10 parts. If it's the D12, into 12 parts, and so forth. And each of those portions becomes a sign in of itself. And then we make up a chart with that. And each planet will fall in a certain sign, in a certain divisional, besides the natal chart. And since we're on this topic, look also to your harmonic charts, the dignity of your planets in your harmonic charts. If you have an exalted Mars in your natal chart in your 10th house, and you're thinking, why isn't this benefiting my career? It may be debilitated in your D10 divisional. So something to think about.
Cool. Yeah, those are a great tool, and they're really important, especially the D9 in Indian astrology. And so it's kind of interesting. I think what I'm gathering from this is like, on the one hand, there's kind of what we're kind of talking about is like there are planets and things which show kind of our essential nature, okay, and like who we are and what we're doing. And then there's the planets and points and techniques that show us like kind of more like how we are being challenged in life, or for lack of a better term or whatever, to kind of I hate to use the word evolve, but that's the best word for right now, is just like evolve into like a more of a state of being in touch with the truth, being in touch with God and things like that. And so for example, like while the Atmakaraka will show something about your true nature and what you're here to do, or the North Node will show like what you're going towards, there are some other techniques that will show more like how you can advance upon the spiritual path and self-realization. And so some of those techniques are like, Jaimini tells us to look at the 12th sign from the Swamsha, and the Swamsha is the sign that your Atmakaraka falls in in your D9 chart. And there's
Okay. Sorry, can you clarify Atmakaraka?
Yeah, Atmakaraka is the soul planet that Alex has been mentioning. So
Cool.
I won't get too into it here because there are rules for reversing the direction based on it being an even or an odd sign. So, you know, it's like, kids, don't try this at home kind of deal, you know, get some more education on it than this video is going to give. But, you know, this is just to give you a taste. So like Jaimini, for example, says to look for moksha and bhakti from Swamsha's 12th. So the 12th house from the Swamsha. And so like he says, and I'll just read a couple things, you know, Ketu therein, liberation, the sun in Ketu, faith in Shiva, with Venus in Lakshmi, Jupiter, Samba Shiva. So he's giving deities for the planets that fall in this 12th sign. And basically the idea is that you, in a classical Indian context, you would propitiate that deity or do mantras or engage in certain maybe tantric practices or whatever for that deity. And that would help your path of moksha or bhakti if you're not necessarily somebody who's trying to become, you know, a Buddha or whatever. But there's always, we can always aspire to the divine on some level, each and every one of us. And that's the beautiful thing about bhakti. In medieval astrology, you have something called the Almutin Figuris, which is the winner of the chart. And that's also a complex calculation, but that planet gives you something similar to what Jaimini is talking about, gives you kind of like a planet or a deity or a principle to aspire to guide you down your path of spiritual evolution, self-realization. So it gets, you know, it just gets pretty interesting. And then that's kind of why I mentioned the Trans-Saturnians as well, because they work on this like triple process where it's not about like necessarily, they don't have necessarily to do with like who you are as an individual trying to fulfill an earthly destiny, that, you know, they have more to do with like opening you up to something beyond yourself as an individual. And I think that's where Ketu really comes in too. Whereas Rahu is more in that path of like destiny and dharma in a sense. And they're both equally important. I'm not saying one's spiritual and one's not. It's just they're two different halves of the whole.
Okay, so whenever you were talking about this, like I got a little lost, and so like
That's fair.
and yeah, because it was just a lot right there. So
Yeah.
what exactly were you referring to again when you were referring to some of these? Because some of these words are like unfamiliar, like to me,
Yeah,
especially.
sure.
And
So what I was referring to is like I was reading some Jaimini Sutras and actually I have
okay, and wait, can you explain what Jaimini is and what
Oh
sutras
yeah,
are?
sure.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay, so the Jaimini Sutras are an ancient Indian text written by a sage called Jaimini, and there's a few different versions out there. I have Ernst Wilhelm's translation, which I really recommend and like because he translates it word by word, so you get to see like how each word is being translated. But what I was reading is this technique for finding like a deity. I think it's called the Ishtadevata in Sanskrit. And I could be wrong, but in any case, finding a deity that you would propitiate for spiritual realization, which means drawing yourself closer to the divine. So like, for example, Ketu deals with Ganesha, which is an Indian deity. And these are all Indian deities. Lakshmi is the goddess of fortune and things like that. Shiva, you know, Shiva is like the master yogi and also a symbol of the supreme godhead. And then with Rahu, you get Durga. Durga is a version of the divine mother, like Kali, that's like really fierce and ferocious. So, but it's possible to translate these Indian deities into universal principles as well.
Right.
So I hope that clarifies. I know it's kind of complicated.
Well, right. And I just like, because there are a lot of things that I personally understand when you're talking, but at the same time, I also want to make sure that like if someone's not familiar with it, like that they can get the context or whatever.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Especially some of these words that are not necessarily that familiar, I guess. But thank you for sharing that. And to go off of what you were just saying about this idea of like deities versus spiritual principles, that's actually something I was thinking as you were saying it, because you can take a lot of these ideas and if someone says, okay, this is related to a deity, then you could actually just take it as, okay, well, what was that deity connected to in this tradition? And then get into the idea of that. Like, for example, Ganesha or Ganesh is connected to this idea of what is it, like
removing obstacles.
Removing obstacles. That's what I was trying to think of. And so that's
and
also
the Om.
okay, and that's also related to this idea of like Jupiter, right? Jupiter being the planet of freedom. So there's a connection to like Ganesh and Jupiter in that sense. And so there are a lot of these ideas that are kind of like, there's a lot of intersectionality, I guess you could say, taking a word from like sociological perspectives in astrology and also all branches of spirituality. But anyway, like, so I guess like what Alex and Lars were both saying is that this idea of breaking things down and getting into like a deeper, gaining a deeper perspective on the natal chart instead of just from the regular perspective that people are also often just looking at, right? So breaking it down and getting into like the minutia of it, and being very Virgo in some ways.
Yeah.
And so versus like, but it's also still kind of Pisces, like, and we could get into the polarities of that as well with the houses or the signs and how that relates to spiritual instead of growth. Like, I really don't like this idea of like growth or evolution, because then it makes it sound like some people are better than other people.
Right.
And I think that that's really a hangover we all have from religion. And I think that personally, I like to look at it as more like experiences. And this is where we're, gaining new experiences, or we are experiencing new things in this area or more things in this area in order to be more balanced as a soul.
Yeah.
And so that's just personally like what I've come to think of, because a lot of things, like even in like evolutionary astrology, comes off as like, in religion, like talking about like sin, like this idea of skip steps or something.
Oh yeah, sure.
And so I just kind of want to point out that it's possible to look at some of these ideas without moralizing it. And personally, I think that it's actually really important not to moralize it, because we don't want to discourage anyone. We want to lift them up and empower them. And when I say we, I just mean generally, right? Not that you guys do that. I'm just saying, like, anyway, I just wanted to throw some of those things out there that I think are important.
Thanks.
So about what you said, that got me thinking a bit about how my own mentality is in regards to these things. I do like the concept of evolutionary astrology, like not what has been coined as evolutionary astrology, as the astrology that looks at the evolution of someone's spiritual essence. I do like that, and I do also think that, let me not put it that way, not that some people are better, that's kind of better or worse is kind of a lowly thing, a lowly perspective,
right? Exactly,
to look at it from. But I do believe that some people are more evolved, some people have more energy, some people are closer to their realization, some people are more progressed on their path. And it's hard to say, like, if you have a second grader and someone who just got out of university, like, if you tell the person that just got out of university, like, you're the same as the second grader, like,
right,
you're going to get punched. Like, what have I been doing all these years, right? And also, I don't believe in like 8th place medals and that concept of like rewarding the last place as well. I don't really believe in that. But hey, that's just me, right? So I know that in this new libertarian world, that might not resonate with many, and but going back to some of the more technical things that we spoke about, I remember, James, you mentioning the sun at the beginning of it, and I was thinking, does the sun really show how a person will evolve in this life? And I'm thinking that unless it's like the soul planet, or it's conjunct like the North Node, or it does something else, The sun just basically shows who you are and what is the energy that fuels you in this life. Because I'm thinking, the planet that gets us to evolve must be difficult in a way. There's and again, with the North Node and with the nodes, there's difficulty with both of them. There's always difficulty associated with them. With the soul planet, again, the place where the soul planet is, the natural things of the soul planet, if it's Mercury, it's your communication, your intellect, if it's something else, and the houses that it rules are also places where you will either be challenged or you will need to deal with challenges through the energy of that planet. And that's the same with any element in the chart that is meant to get us to grow in a way, because that's human nature. We only grow through challenges. And I think there's a passage in the Emerald Tablets of Thoth where it says, Earth must resist man, or else man existeth not, because man thrives only on those things which resist him.
That's right.
So basically, in our human nature, we need to constantly overcome that sixth house in order to evolve, in order to grow. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that a planet which is very prominent in this area, like which gets us to evolve, will also present its challenges. Now, one technique came to mind, which I actually used to do like a special reading for, how to enhance the energy of any planet. And I would focus here on, of course, again, working with the energy of your soul planet. Basically, the technique is quite simple. You take, you count houses from the planet that you want to work with to one of its ruled signs, ideally the root sign. So for Jupiter, you can count to both Pisces and Sagittarius, but you would look more to Sagittarius. For Mars, you would look to Scorpio and Aries, but more to Aries. And you count from there to the sign, and to the sign from the planet to the sign. And if it's, for example, if you have Venus in Gemini, right, then you have Taurus in the 12th from Venus. Then the energy of your Venus, the things related to Venus in your house, like wealth, romance, sensuality, you will need to learn detachment to attain more to those things, or to be more imbalanced to those things, because you have a 12th house necessity in regards to that planet, because that planet, the signs ruled by that planet are 12 from it. So if you have Mars in Cancer, for example, that's a debilitated Mars, and that sometimes poses some challenges. You would look to Aries, that would be your 10th. So you have to kind of learn to get out there, right? It's 10th from Mars. You have to learn to get out there. You have to learn to put yourself out there, because with Mars in Cancer, you may be reluctant to do that. So that's one technique which I found very useful when trying to kind of grow the energy of any planet, or heal the energy of any problematic planet. And also, if you have, for example, this example that I gave, Mars being in Cancer, you need to focus on 10th house themes. Look at your natal chart. What is in your 10th house? Is anything blocking that Mars from growing through the inhibition of your 10th house? That's just an example. I think the viewers will be able to translate that to whatever planet they have challenges with or wish to
right.
to work with.
Right, and what Alex is referring to is like this idea of looking at the house placement of whatever this planet is, and then counting that as the first house. Like I guess like imagining that as the first house, and then relative to that, for example, like he was talking about, if Mars is in Cancer, and that would be like the first house in this idea, then Aries would be the 10th house using whole sign houses. And just to clarify that for anyone who's listening, so that it's easy for them to find. And I think that's, a really great way of looking at it. And that's something that I do sometimes in different ways, is looking at, okay, so how does this planet relate to the chart if it's the central focus, right? If it's the focal point. And I guess that's really what you're saying, is like making it the focal point, and then of the entire chart. But to go back to this idea of the sun, and to clarify what I was referring to, I guess, about the sun being a spiritual planet, in that I view it as like the inner true spiritual self, or the inner essence, the thing that makes you, that gives you life, right? And so I I consider it like the higher self. And like we collectively, I think as a, as a world or a society, think of it as this idea of like God. And so God is like this higher version of us, right? And so the sun is something that is in us, like it's like our inner spiritual motivation. And then, and this is the way I explain it to clients, is I say, okay, your sun sign isn't like your personal self, in that it's not like your conscious projection of self, but it's your spiritual essence, and that is projected through your ascendant. I tell them that it's like this. It's like a video, or like a projector, like a movie projector, and the projector itself is, or the lens on the projector is like the ascendant, and the light that's passing through that is the sun, or like various like ways of talking about that analogy. And then the screen, being like the life. But I also kind of take the screen as being like the moon too, in some ways, and like this idea of like it being, because the light is projected onto the moon like the sun, right? And so this was an analogy that came to me one day, and I was like, "Oh, I really like this." I was just sitting and doodling, and just kind of came to me and it makes sense, because it's like this idea that the moon represents like a lot of times our instincts, and how not a lot of times, I really think it does. It represents our instincts and how we react to and respond to things in life. And it's based on our personal experiences, and so it evokes emotional responses or whatever. Now I know that we had some different ideas about the moon, or maybe we thought we did, but like we've talked about the moon before, like in private, and I think that we all kind of like agreed upon it. We were just talking about it in different ways, and I think that happens actually a lot in astrology. But that's just like a really brief
Sure.
overview of how I've come to look at this, and it seems to be really effective for me in grappling with the idea. And the ascendant could even be like the entire like camera, but like there's no perfect analogy for anything.
Yeah.
But it, like the ascendant is always like the physical body, so
Sure.
it's definitely like something very like personal and materialized. Whereas the sun is not necessarily as material or materialized in its representation.
Okay, well, yeah, since we've returned to the sun, I guess I'll comment on it as quickly as I can. But it's, I always go back to what a couple different texts say, and those two texts are Parashara's astrology text, where he calls it the Sarvam Atman, which means the soul of all things, and Vedis Valens, where he calls the sun the nous, which is a Greek word that denotes like the cosmic mind,
Right.
the transcendent whole or whatever. Nous has different ways of interpreting it, actually. But they're pretty much saying the same thing in slightly different words or traditions, whatever. Okay, where was I? So basically, when I'm looking at a chart, like I don't necessarily look at the sun, and I know you guys don't do this either. Like we don't like look at the sun and say, oh, that's literally the soul. It's like it's not about it being like literally this one planet is the soul, or this one planet is the higher
Right.
self. Like, it's not about that. But the sun, to me, most fundamentally represents the quality of our connection to the source. So it's a really general kind of thing. And it's that quality that allows us to have a strong willpower, self-confidence, and to shine in the world in a unique way, and to seek honor and things like that. So basically, when I'm interpreting a chart and looking at the sun, I don't look at the sun to see like how spiritual a person is, or how, like, not necessarily even how they're going to get in touch with how they're how they're going to like access God or something like that. I look at it more as like, this is how the person's like, this is their fundamental nature that's driving them toward honor and truth and things like that. And then of course the dispositor of any planet or any point is going to tell you something more about like kind of the soul of that planet. So it's really interesting in that you know, a strong sun will give these strong qualities of what the sun means, you know, nobility, the quest for truth, a certain amount of self-centeredness because the sun, you know, blots out everything. And so that's like a person who just, you know, kind of will go for it and seem kind of self-centered at times. But one of my, probably one of my favorite, just like beings, I consider him potentially the greatest prophet to ever grace the earth, is this Persian man, the Bab, who appeared in 1844 in Shiraz, Persia, and his movement eventually became the Baha'i movement. But the Bab himself is just an incredible human being, and his story is incredible. And he had both lights in the signs of their fall. He had Sun in Libra, and he had Moon in Scorpio. Now,
talking about Scorpio,
as
right?
Alex puts on his hoodie, yeah.
He's the Sith. He's the Sith Lord.
Anyway, so the reason I bring this up is because, I mean, well, first of all, you know, prophets are going to be an exception to the usual rules, but I found it interesting because if memory serves me, Venus, the dispositor of the sun, is also in Libra. And so Venus has, you know, powerful essential dignity. And so even though the Bab was, his reputation and how he was viewed by, you know, a lot of people who were trying to retain power in Persia was more negative because the sun's fallen, you know, behind that fallen sun, behind that fallen reputation, because his movement literally brought like a lot of bloodshed, because there was a whole religious war, because he was he was bringing this new message, and the imams of the Shia Islam were like, you know, no, this is heretical and stuff. But it's just interesting to see, like, okay, the dispositor's in really great condition, so that can show you something about what's behind, you know, what that person's doing in their quest for honor and truth and justice and things like that. So okay, once again, a little longer than I wanted it to be, but that's my contribution for sun stuff.
Alex, you had your hand raised. Did you have something you wanted to say?
No, I was just playing.
Oh, well, I think
I would add something to that, because
Yeah,
Lars,
cool.
I think, like, whenever Lars goes in depth into these things, it always gets me thinking, and I go like through this rabbit hole with you, Lars, throughout this whole thing, and then, you know, if it's my turn to speak right after you speak, I'm still trapped there into like, oh, this whole thing, and. You know, and it's awesome if you can understand, and if you can, you know, if you have enough knowledge to kind of latch onto that. I think that's really valuable information. So I would suggest to anyone watching that they go back to the things that you're referencing, and kind of research them online. I think they can find good information on that, because I know that I have researched a lot of the things that you speak about. And even if they don't like stick to my astrological toolbox that I use every day, I know that in that moment when I'm researching them, maybe I'll realize something else which is important and which I really need for my practice. So
sure.
Just wanted to say that.
Thanks.
Now, whether there was something else I would add about spiritual evolution and about the sun. Well, I think you guys did a good job of covering that. I know there was something which I wanted to mention as well, and it's tied to the soul planet as well, because for me, that's like the sun around which the whole universe of personal development revolves. So since you guys have covered so much and in such great detail, I think I will just say that for me, without going into like too much of the Virgo-y stuff, right? Because obviously, if I have to read a chart and look at the soul planet, I just don't just look at that soul planet. I look at it in like divisionals and various kinds of aspects and degrees and whatnot. But simplistically, I would take the soul planet as the ascendant. So if your soul planet falls in Leo, take the entire house of Leo as your first house, and then Virgo as your second, as your third. And that chart I look at as that person's chart of maximum potential. So if in this life they work on themselves, they strive to evolve, and of course you have to go back to the chart and see how inclined are they to evolve. Do they really care at all about evolving, right? There's other things. But if they do, and especially if you're an astrologer and they come to you with this question, like, I want to evolve and I want to grow and I'm burning to like take myself to new levels, then look at the houses from their soul planet and use that as their chart of full potential. Like if when they're, later on in life, as the more they evolve, the more that will become kind of their chart, their true natal chart. Of course, the ascendant will always be there, like the base material energy that their life unfolds in. So, for example, if you have a Libra ascendant, but your soul planet is in Leo, the more you evolve, the more you become that Leo ascendant, and the planets start to kind of manifest in the houses that they are from that. But you will always have that Libra energy that kind of your life will be built on. So it's important to kind of like know how to differentiate between the subtleties of each kind of sub-house system.
Sure.
But yeah.
Oh no, I was kind of joking around. I was going to say, I was like, so Alex, you and I both have Mercury at 28 degrees of an air sign. Does that mean that we're soulmates? Like, joking about
it may be, like, who knows? Maybe at the end of it, Lars will marry us or something.
I had to throw that out there because of our inside joke or whatever, but
yeah.
It's just funny, like,
so yeah, to me that's really important, looking at the soul planet. Obviously that's all I spoke about, because some of the other good stuff you guys have beat me to it, but I would definitely not hesitate to look at the chart from the soul planet. Sure. To see the person's maximum full potential. So yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, that is really that's really a good point. And let's see. Oh yeah. So one thing I think we didn't bring up, and I think it's kind of important, is the issue of sect, and the sect light, and then also Jupiter, obviously, being very important to spirituality. But like this, and this is something Lars and I have spoken about, Venus being equally as important, and and I think that it's to do with sect in that. If you were born during the day, then the sun and Jupiter are really connected to this idea of spirituality, truth, and philosophy, and higher mind realizations and authentic expression, etc. And at night, the moon and Venus being more prominent in your life as representations of those topics, just due to the issue of sect, and sect being, like I said, if you're born during the day or at night. So if you're born during the day, then you're of the diurnal sect, which is ruled by the sun, and the diurnal planets are the sun, Jupiter, and Saturn. And the nocturnal sect is if you're born at night, and that's the moon, Mars, Venus. So and then Mercury is kind of like this of a dual nature, but I think it's Valens who says that Mercury rules all air signs by night, or something like that. So I think
that's his triplicity. He gets triplicity in the air signs at
night. And so Mercury plays like this even more significant role at night, if in an air sign, really like being more prominent for a person. So and I would say that that's connected to this idea of the authentic self and the truest expression and form of the individual. And something to consider where Mercury is, especially in reference to that idea of where Mercury is at night, and air signs is a big quality to look for. So, so I know that we're getting close to the end of our video, but I'm sure that there are some final thoughts if you guys want to share some stuff.
Sure. Yeah. I guess what I've been really thinking about a lot since I mentioned it again is Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, and kind of what they represent, even if you don't use them, because a lot of traditional astrologers have stopped using them or whatever. And I think that is that, like, when people come to us as astrologers or readers of any kind, what they're really looking for, even if they think they just want to know when they're going to get married or something like that, they're really looking for some kind of insight into the deeper meaning and magic of life.
Right,
And
exactly.
what I find with those planets, and I've used them in a lot of horary charts too, and it's just fascinating where they can help to access the deeper meaning, though the person's not always ready to hear it. I actually did a reading recently where I found this out through tarot, what I told them, but I also saw it with later. I realized, oh yeah, and Uranus was right on their moon at that time too, and I just didn't put it in the chart. But you know, this idea that like this was something that was happening to bring you deeper insight into relationship, because this was about relationships, and this was, you know, so I guess what I'm talking about is like however you do it, whether you might use the Trans-Saturnians, or you might use a host of other techniques like the Atmakaraka or some of the Arabic lots and things. It's like finding a way to help the person make sense of difficult things that have transpired in the past. You know, if you look at like,
Yes.
you see, oh wow, Pluto would have crossed their ascendant at like 25, and you're like, I'm curious about, you know, this time in your life, like, was there something, you know, kind of extremely difficult and that kind of thing, and then it comes out that well, like I knew one person I think had like breast cancer when that happened, and another person had like an aneurysm when that happened. Kind of some nasty Pluto stuff.
Right.
You know, I think yeah, I won't I won't go down the list of what it can mean, but just, I don't want to scare anyone, but it's like, you know, you can, as an astrologer, the fact that Pluto was involved, because obviously Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune don't always have to be involved during a traumatic event. It could just be a difficult time lord, and the Trans-Saturnian's not involved. But if it's involved, it gives us a key to like looking at that and saying, well, you know, this is what that time of that period of time was like. It was just a period where, due to the natural rhythms and cycles that deal with your life specifically, you were going to be going through a time where everything had to be burned away. And you know, it's, there's no like, oh well, you failed and that's why you had the disease, or you know, if you had succeeded you wouldn't have had the disease and this great Pluto thing would have happened. It's like a non-judgmental thing of like, you know, this, what we call Pluto, was here to bring you this phoenix kind of fire message experience. And sometimes that can be really liberating for the person, because they can realize like, wow, that meant something, and that horrible event wasn't meaningless, you know? So I think that's the most powerful aspect of astrology in many ways. And that's also a deeply spiritual way to use it in the truest sense of the word. So those will be my closing remarks.
Well, yeah, and just real quick, I want to comment on this because I was just thinking about it the other day, or yesterday, I think it was, or the day before. Like, and it always happens where we're all thinking about the same stuff all the time, and it's actually kind of amazing.
Cool.
I think that's very spiritual in and of itself, is that our minds are going to the same places, and then we do these, you know, these videos every week.
Yeah.
But like this idea of what is the role of, like, what role are we filling in the world as astrologers is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, and seeing it as some sort of service to the world, and, you know, not just something for personal gain, obviously. And I think that anyone who's involved in anything like this, in which is a helping art, is connected to this idea of service and helping. And I think that in and of itself is very spiritual. And I guess like one of the things that I was considering is, as astrologers, what are we doing? And what we're doing is we're helping people to understand. We are helping to bring the light of awareness into people's lives, and it's a very sacred role to play, I think. And I think that it's also very humbling, because we do have a lot of insight due to like understanding these things, and the ability to use it to help others is a very like humbling thing. And I think that it's kind of like being a priest in some way, and that we're making a connection between the material world and the divine, in bringing awareness to the lives of those around us. And so, of course, like, you know, me, Pisces, all the Pisces stuff I've got going on, I have to, like, you know, bring it there to this deeper sense. But I think that I think that a lot of people are going to be going deep right now with Mercury and Sagittarius. Anyway, I'm talking a lot. So there's another Mercury and Sagittarius transit thing. Alex, sorry about that interjection.
Well, I think we managed to cover like beautifully whatever we could cover in this amount of time, and of course, like this topic is an endless, infinite topic. Like at the beginning of this video, we wanted to talk about just spirituality as a whole. Then we realized that's something which will keep us talking until next Christmas. So I think we did a great job, and yeah, I have really nothing to add to that.
Cool.
Well, guys, thanks very much for watching. And if you haven't taken Lars's advice at the beginning of the video to subscribe to this awesome YouTube channel, you should definitely do that now. And we post videos every week on Fridays, so stay tuned. And thank you very much for watching.
Bye. Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.